Welcome to Monday's Mental Mistakes. This week is the first in a series of 3 videos about naive realism. Naive realism has 3 tenets to it, and in this video we will cover the first of these. The first tenet of naive realism is the tendency to believe that the world is as we perceive it to be. That is, that we directly perceive objective reality in an unbiased manner. Naive realism makes us more likely to underestimate how unreliable our perception is. At the same time, we're unlikely to recognise how swayed we are by our social attitudes, beliefs, preferences and priorities. Here's a simple example. I will now proceed to tap out the tune Auld Lang Syne. What percentage of people do you think would be able to correctly identify the song if I hadn't told them what song it was? Now, listen to this tune and try to identify what song it is that I'm tapping. What I was tapping out was Yankee Doodle Dandy. Were you able to identify it? If you thought that more than about 3% of people would be able to correctly identify the song from the tapping, then congratulations, you suffer from naive realism, like the rest of us. When you already know what the song is, you actually misperceive the taps as giving more information than they really do. People tend to estimate that about 50% of people should be able to guess the song from hearing the taps. In reality, only about 3% do. This assumption that simply because it seems clear when you know what it is, that others should also find it fairly clear, is one facet of naive realism. The principal way to counter naive realism is to be aware of the limitations of your perceptions. Psychologists have established, often in dramatic fashion, that our perceptions are frequently and systematically unreliable. This doesn't mean that they cannot be relied upon at all, but rather that we see them as more reliable than they actually are. So it is reasonable to say, I didn't see that, but less reasonable to then conclude, it wasn't there. It is particularly important to be aware of our limitations in times of conflict. So if our perception or understanding of something is at odds with someone else's, the first possibility to be considered is that at least one of us has misperceived or misunderstood the situation. Naive realism is easily demonstrated with perception, but also applies to our beliefs and cognitions. That is, just as we don't perfectly perceive the world, our understanding of it is also not always reliable. Naive realism is the belief that our opinions, thoughts and attitudes are not significantly biased or flawed, but instead are solidly built on a clear understanding of the world. This is a very strong illusion, and simply knowing that we are biased does little to dispel our feeling that we are not. Again, countering this bias is particularly important during conflict. If someone disagrees with our opinion, attitude, or belief about the world, the first possibility to be considered is that at least one of us has a flawed or biased understanding of the situation. The problem of naive realism doesn't mean that we can never trust our faculties to reliably inform us about the world. Rather, it simply means that we should always be on the lookout for ways in which we might be wrong. That is, we should investigate whether a misunderstanding of reality is a cause of any conflict. But once investigated, we need not further doubt our faculties. For example, when a homeopath argues that we should accept homeopathy, it is reasonable to investigate whether there's some truth to their claims. However, once that has been done, we need not consider the claims any further simply because our faculties are imperfect. To dismiss homeopaths simply because you disagree with them would be to fall into the trap of naive realism. To dismiss them because you understand their claims and know why they are wrong is to be rational. One way in which naive realism manifests itself is when people assess themselves on the pessimist and optimist scale. Many people insist that they are, instead, realists and put themselves squarely in the middle of the spectrum. This is similar to how many people insist that others are too subjective and that they are the only ones trying to be objective about a situation or issue, or that they're the only ones being reasonable. Such dismissals of others as biased or flawed, while not accounting for one's own failings, are often a manifestation of naive realism. In conclusion, the first tenet of naive realism is the tendency to assume that our perception and understanding of reality is accurate and unbiased. Until next week, may your mental mistakes be minor.